The footprint was fresh. Cade knew this because the water in it was still clouding, disturbed soil settling in spirals, the brown opacity of pulverized earth mixing with groundwater that had rushed in to fill the depression the moment the foot had lifted. 12 meters across, 4 feet deep at the center. The compression had turned soft forest floor into something approaching concrete at the base. Soil particles crushed together until the air gaps collapsed and the earth became mineral cement. Around the rim, the destruction radius? Spruce trees snapped at the roots, their 30-meter trunks folded flat like grass under a boot, the exposed root plates still holding clumps of soil that hadn't decided whether to fall yet. Fresh meant within the last 6 hours. Fresh meant the walker that made this print was still in the valley, still following its gravitational route through the lowest terrain, still placing one 12-meter foot in front of the other at intervals of approximately 90 seconds. Fresh meant Cade had 66 hours before this particular walker came back around on its patrol loop and placed its foot in roughly this exact spot again. 3 months of tracking had turned the mathematics into instinct. Each walker followed a fixed route, a valley-bottom path worn into the earth by repeated passage, every footprint landing within 10 meters of the previous cycle's placement. The route was predictable. The timing was predictable. If you understood the schedule, you could move through the valleys in the gaps between passages like a pedestrian crossing a road between cars. If you got the timing wrong, you became part of the footprint. He talked to himself. Not because he was losing grip, because 3 months of solitude had made his own voice the only confirmation that he existed. Without another person to witness him, Cade sometimes felt like the footprints. Temporary impressions in soft ground, filling with water, fading to ecosystem. The footprint trail led southwest through the valley. Cade followed the rim, the edge where compressed earth met undisturbed forest, the firmest footing available. The valley narrowed ahead toward a river, the Iskut, glacier-fed, cold enough to ache. The ridge beyond the river held the grove, the treetop haven. 2 more days of walking if the valley was clear. If. He heard the second one at nightfall. Not the walker that had made the fresh prints. That one was ahead of him, southwest, the sound of its passage arriving as distant compression events. The muffled crump of 12-meter feet hitting earth, transmitted through the ground as tremors that rattled the water in his canteen. The second one was behind him, southeast, a different route, a different valley running parallel, close enough that its footfall tremors arrived through the ridge between the 2 valleys as deep, slow vibrations that hit different from the southwest walker. 2 frequencies, 2 giants. 2 patrol routes converging toward the same point, the river crossing. The quiet dread specialist in Cade's chest, the part that had kept him alive for 3 months, noted the convergence and filed it under bad. 2 walkers approaching the same valley floor meant the crossing window was narrower than his calculations had assumed. 1 route compressed, 2 routes intersected. Above the valley, the ridgeline was black against the last of the light. Somewhere on that ridge, cedars. Ancient western red cedars, too massive to be toppled by passing walkers, too high on the gradient for the walkers to reach. And in those cedars, lights. Firelight. The treetop haven. People. The first people he'd seen in 73 days. Dawn, and the valley floor was a cathedral of damage. The convergence was worse than he'd estimated in the dark. 2 walker routes crossed at the Iskut River, their patrol paths overlapping in a zone of total devastation. 400 meters of stripped earth, flattened forest, and rerouted water, where 2 sets of 12-meter footprints had been laid over each other cycle after cycle, until the terrain had been compressed beyond recognition. Below the gradient line, The invisible boundary, roughly 800 meters elevation, above which no walker had ever been observed walking. Below it, their territory, their highways, their patrol loops executed with clockwork precision every 72 hours.
Southwest Walker passed this point approximately 14 hours ago. Return in 58 hours. Southeast Walker, last passage, estimate 20 hours based on tremor intervals. Return in 52 hours. Crossing window, 52 hours for 400 meters. That's fine. That's more than fine.
The math was fine. It was always fine. The math had been fine when he'd lost Marcus at the Stikine River crossing. 50+ hours of clear window, easy traverse, and then the third walker that wasn't on any cycle they'd tracked because it was a new route, a new patrol. A walker that had never used that valley before and decided on the precise morning that two people were 200 meters below the gradient line to start. He descended. The gradient drop from the valley wall to the river floor took 20 minutes. Steep scree, loose rock, no trail. Below, the devastation was total. He walked across compressed earth that held his boot prints the way concrete holds footprints. Barely, temporarily, the surface so dense that his weight made almost no impression. The footprints were geological. Inside the nearest crater, Southwest Walker, fresh from last night's passage, the compression had created a bowl 4 feet deep and 12 meters across, the walls sheer and smooth, the bottom already pooling with groundwater. In 3 more cycles, this would be a pond. In a year, a wetland. In a decade, a meadow. The walkers destroyed forests and created ecosystems with the same footstep. You cross the river inside a footprint. The irony wasn't lost. The thing that destroyed paths also created them. The walker's 12-meter foot had compressed the riverbed into a natural dam, the water diverting around the compaction zone in a shallow spill that he could wade at ankle depth. He crossed dry-footed on the back of a giant's step. The third one came from the north, not southwest, not southeast, north. A direction he hadn't been tracking because the northern valley was too narrow for an Ironbark Walker. The canyon walls less than 30 meters apart, tight enough to prevent a 100-foot organism from walking without scraping its bark plates against the rock. This one scraped. He heard it. The grinding protest of bark armor against canyon walls. A sound like a ship's hull dragging across ice. Continuous, resonant. The entire northern valley acting as an amplifier for the friction of something massive forcing itself through a space designed by glaciers and not by giants. He ran. Running below the gradient line. Running on compressed earth that transmitted every footfall into the ground like a signal. Running toward the far valley wall and the ascent to the ridge and the cedars and the haven and the people. Knowing that the math had been fine right up until it wasn't. Because Marcus had died when the math was fine. Because the walkers didn't owe him a predictable world. 300 meters. 90 seconds between footfalls. 300 meters divided by the walker's stride length of 18 meters equaled 17 strides. 17 strides at 90 seconds each equaled 25 minutes before the walker reached the river crossing. Cade had 25 minutes to climb 200 vertical meters of scree slope, cross the gradient line, and reach the cedars. His legs said 15 minutes. His heart said 12. His memory of Marcus said, "Stop counting." He climbed like an animal. Hands and feet, no trail, using the spruce roots as handholds, the scree as footholds, the desperation as fuel. Behind him, the northern walker's footfalls counting down his crossing window in 90-second crumps that grew louder with each step. 800 meters. The gradient line. He crossed it on his hands and knees, pulling himself over a rock ledge onto a flat terrace of old-growth forest that the walkers had never touched. The trees here were vertical, undamaged, their root systems intact, their canopy unbroken. Untouched earth. He lay face down in the moss and breathed. From the ridgeline, the walker was beautiful, the way heavy machinery is beautiful. Scale without aesthetic intent, power without malice. The simple physics of enormous mass applied to soft terrain. It walked the river crossing, its bark plates grinding, its dead branch crown catching sunlight and throwing long shadows westward. It placed each foot with the precision of ritual. The same route, the same step placement, the same 90-second interval. No hurry, no deviation. The most destructive thing in the forest, and it was as predictable as tide. If you want to see what Cade finds in the cedars, subscribe to Phantom Frame Studios. The Haven is waiting. But the math that got him here might not get anyone else out. The cedars were the oldest things on the ridgeline. Western red cedars, Thuya plicata. Some of them over 1,000 years old, trunks 12 feet in diameter, crowns spreading 100 feet across. They'd survived ice ages, wildfires, logging booms, and now they survived the walkers by the simple advantage of being uphill. The gradient that kept the giants in the valleys kept the cedars untouched. And in those cedars, people. 37 people. He counted them as he approached. Ranger's instinct, census as greeting. 37 people living in the canopy of trees that were older than the cathedrals of Europe, on platforms built from salvaged lumber and paracord, and the specific creativity that emerges when the ground isn't safe and the sky is all you have left. A woman at the lower platform saw him first. She didn't shout, sound discipline, even here. But she raised her hand, and then another person raised theirs, and then 3 more. And then a child waved from a platform 70 feet up. And suddenly, Cade Mercer's 73 days of solitude collided with the fact that other people existed, and they were waving at him, and his eyes blurred because isolation doesn't end gracefully. It shatters.
I tracked the valley route from the northeast. Parks Canada Ranger. I mapped the patrol cycles. I have data on the northern walker. It uses the narrow canyon now. That changes your crossing windows.
He said it all at once. 3 months of solitary observations delivered in a single paragraph because he'd been rehearsing the handoff in his head for weeks. The data transfer, the information that made his isolation useful, the proof that being alone had been worth something. Nobody asked about the data first. A woman named Inez handed him water. A man named Paul offered dried salmon. A child, she couldn't have been more than 8, gave him a piece of flatbread baked on a cedar planked griddle and watched him eat it with the focus of someone who understood that hunger was more interesting than cartography. 3 days in the Haven, and Cade couldn't sleep.
Here. Thank you.
The others slept. 37 people in hammocks and sleeping bags on cedar platforms, the gentle sway of the canopy a cradle, the distant crumps of walker footfalls, a metronome they'd learned to sleep through, the way coastal people sleep through waves. They'd adapted. They'd built routines, cooking schedules, rain collection, schooling for the 7 children, a calendar of safe descent windows when teams went to ground level to forage. Cade couldn't adapt. 3 months alone had calcified his survival patterns into identity. He monitored the tremors compulsively. He counted footfalls. He tracked timing deviations. He annotated his map with the northern walker's new route. the one that changed everything. The one that compressed the crossing windows at the river from 52 hours to something he hadn't calculated yet, because the third walker's cycle was unknown, and unknowns were the thing that killed Marcus. Marcus. The name sat in his chest like a stone in a footprint. Marcus Adeyemi, Parks Canada colleague, trail partner. The person who'd been standing beside Cade at the Stikine River crossing when the untracked walker came from the west and the mathematics failed and two people running became one person running and the other becoming part of the geography. Cade hadn't looked back. He'd heard the compression, crump, a sound he'd heard 1,000 times from safe distance, this time from no distance at all. And he'd run, and Marcus hadn't. And the word hadn't carried a weight that no map could distribute.
You don't sleep.
I monitor.
You monitored for 3 months alone. You're here now. There's a rotation. Paul takes nights.
I don't rely on rotations.
She wasn't wrong. Inez Dubois, former schoolteacher, current Haven administrator, the woman who'd organized 37 people into a functioning canopy community in 3 months by applying classroom management to survival logistics. She saw him clearly. That was the problem with people. They saw you. The forest didn't. The walkers didn't. 73 days of being unseen, and Cade had built a life in the blind spot. Below the haven, the valley was dark. The walker patrol routes were invisible from the ridgeline at night. No bioluminescence, no light generation. The Ironbark Walkers were dark shapes in a dark forest, detectable only by the sound and vibration of their footfalls. Crump. Silence. Crump. Silence. The pulse of a forest that had been claimed by something too large to argue with. In the morning, Cade watched a walker across the far valley from the highest platform. Dawn light caught its bark plates and found the red-amber undertones. The inner wood, the living tissue beneath the armor, glowing warm in the sunrise like embers in a banked fire. Its crown of dead branches, bone-white, sharp-angled, 20 feet across, carved the air above the canopy line. It moved with the patience of erosion, each step compressing the forest floor into the geology of the future. Behind it, a trail of footprints stretching to the horizon, each one a crater, each crater a pond, each pond a future meadow. The walkers were destroying the forest the way floodplains destroy farmland, seasonally, catastrophically, and with the incidental gift of new soil that would grow things their destructor couldn't imagine. Cade closed his notebook. The data was complete. Northern walker cycle mapped, crossing windows revised, patrol convergence at the river documented. Everything a tracker needed to survive the valleys was in his pencil lines and grid squares. Everything except the part where surviving alone wasn't the same as surviving.
The northern walker uses a 68-hour cycle, not 72. That compresses your river crossing window to 44 hours. I'd recommend a 2-person maximum for descent teams, staggered departure, with tremor monitoring from the ridgeline.
Will you monitor?
The question was simple. The answer was citizenship. Monitoring from the ridgeline meant staying. Staying meant people. People meant being seen, being relied on, being part of a system where failure wasn't abstract mathematics, but names. Inez, Paul, the 8-year-old who gave him flatbread, the 7 children learning to count walker footfalls the way their grandparents learned to count thunderclaps. He looked at the haven. 37 people in the trees, living above the line because below was the territory of things too large to negotiate with. Cooking fires, learning, flatbread on cedar planks, children who waved at strangers. A community built on the principle that height was safety, and safety was not the same as alone. Below the haven, the walker crossed the far ridge and disappeared behind the tree line, its crown of white branches sinking below the canopy like a bone cathedral submerging. The valley was quiet. The tremors faded. The footprints behind it filled slowly with water. Cade Mercer set down his notebook and joined Paul at the monitoring post. Two people watching the valley. The mathematics hadn't changed. The world was still enormous. The giants were still walking. The ground was still dangerous. But the observation was shared now. The count was mutual. The next crump would arrive in someone else's ears too. The footprints in the valley weren't just destruction. They were maps. And maps, Cade had learned, were worth exactly nothing if nobody else could read them.